Chapter 1. The Weaver's Dream. In the ancient coastal city of Marisal, nestled along the western shores, where the restless sea met towering cliffs of red earth, a young woman named Lila lived a life woven from the rhythms of water and wind. The city sprawled like a patchwork quilt, its mud brick homes and thatched roofs hugging the shoreline, while the air carried the sharp tang of salt and the faint musk of fish drying under the relentless sun. Beyond the docks, where waves crashed against jagged rocks, the cliffs rose high, their surfaces etched with stories of old tales of spirits who danced in the foam and ancestors who sang to the tides. Here, Lila's world unfolded, a delicate thread in the vast tapestry of Marisal's existence. Her parents, weathered fishers named Kofi and Amma, had raised her in a modest shack perched on stilts above the muddy shallows, its walls patched, with palm fronds and its floor creaking under every step. Their hands bore the scars of a lifetime hauling nets, calloused and cracked from years of battling the sea's moods. Yet their hearts brimmed with a quiet pride for their only child. Each evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and gold, they gathered around a flickering lantern crafted from a hollowed gourd. Kneeling on a woven mat, they lifted their voices in prayer, beseeching the spirits of the tides to grant them a bountiful catch and shield them from the storms that prowled the coast. The lantern's dim glow cast shadows that danced across their faces, illuminating the lines of worry etched deep by years of uncertainty. Lila grew up cradled by these rituals, her earliest memories woven with the sound of her father's low, rumbling chants and her mother's soft, lilting melody songs of the sea that spoke of its generosity and its wrath. As a toddler, she toddled along the shore, her tiny feet sinking into the wet sand, while her nimble fingers learned to twist hemp into sturdy cords, mending the frayed edges of her father's nets long before she could steady herself without wobbling. Her parents marveled at her skill, their laughter ringing out like bells when she proudly held up her first knotted repair, the hemp glistening with seawater. Yet as she grew, her spirit stretched beyond the confines of the shack and the endless cycle of fishing. By the time she reached womanhood, her eyes dark and deep as the midnight ocean glimmered with dreams far grander than the horizon her parents knew. She began to see the world not just in the practical stitches of net mending, but in the vibrant patterns of creation. In the quiet hours after the day's work, when the shack fell silent save for the distant crash of waves, she salvaged scraps of cloth and dyed them with pigments she coaxed from crushed shells, indigo leaves, and the fiery petals of hibiscus flowers that bloomed wild along the cliffs. With these, she fashioned a rickety loom from driftwood and vine, its frame wobbling, but sturdy enough to hold her vision. Night after night, she hunched over it, her back aching and her fingers stained with color, weaving tapestries that shimmered with the hues of dawn's first light and dusk's final glow scenes of leaping fish, swirling currents, and the silhouettes of ancestors watching from the stars. Her parents noticed this shift, their once steady joy dimming as they watched her drift from the life they'd built. Where once she'd risen at dawn to join them on the boat, her hands pulling alongside theirs, now she lingered in the shack, her attention consumed by the clack of the loom. Kofi's brow furrowed deeper each time he returned to find her lost in her craft, her fingers dancing over threads instead of nets, while Amma's gentle smiles grew tight, her eyes clouding with unspoken fears. They loved her fiercely, their pride in her cleverness warring with the unease that she was slipping away from their world. The sea had always been their provider, its rhythms their lifeline, and they could not fathom a future where their daughter turned her back on it. One stormy night, the tension broke like a wave against the shore. Kofi's boat limped back to the docks, its hull empty, the nets torn by a sudden squall that had roared in from the deep. He trudged into the shack, his broad shoulders slumped, his face carved with a despair that seemed to age him a decade in a single day. Rainwater dripped from his woven hat, pooling on the floor, and the air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and defeat. Amma followed, her steps slow, her hands trembling as she set down a basket of cracked shells, meager remnants of a failed catch. She turned to Lila, who sat cross-legged by the loom, a half-finished tapestry glowing faintly in the lanterns. Light. Her mother's voice, usually soft as a lullaby, quivered with a raw edge as she pleaded with her daughter to abandon the weaving that consumed her nights. She spoke of their teetering livelihood, of the hunger that loomed if the sea continued to withhold its gifts, and of the need for Lila's hands on the boat to keep their family afloat. The words struck Lila like a breaker crashing over the cliffs, her chest tightening as love for her parents clashed with the fire of her ambition. She sat motionless, the loom shuttle still in her hand, as the storm raged outside, its thunder, a deafening roar that mirrored the turmoil within her. Sleep eluded her that night, her mind restless, torn between the shack's fragile walls and the boundless dreams that stretched beyond the sea's edge. Chapter 2. The Loom of Promise. The storm's echoes lingered in the shack long after the thunder faded, its damp breath seeping into the palm frond walls as Lila sat motionless, her mother's plea hanging heavy in the air. Dawn broke over Marisal with a hesitant light, the sky bruised purple and gold, the sea churning restlessly against the cliffs. Her parents rose with the sun, their silhouettes stooped as they trudged to the docks, their torn nets slung over Kofi's shoulder like a shroud. Lila watched them go, her heart a tangled knot of guilt and defiance, the loom beside her a silent witness to the night's turmoil. The shack felt smaller than ever, its creaking floor and salt-stained walls pressing in, the sea's ceaseless song a reminder of the life she was meant to inherit. Yet her fingers itched for the shuttle, her mind alive with visions of tapestries that could rival the sunrise itself. Torn between duty and desire, she struck a fragile compromise. Days given to the sea, nights surrendered to her craft. By morning, she joined her parents on the weather boat, its hull rocking beneath her as she hauled nets from the water, her hands slick with brine and fish scales. The sun blazed overhead, scorching her skin, while gulls wheeled above. There, cries sharp against the wind. Her muscles ached, her back bent under the weight of sodden ropes, but she pressed on, her efforts easing the strain in her father's eyes and softening the worry lines on her mother's face. When dusk fell, painting the cliffs with shadows, Lila returned to the shack, her body weary but her spirit unbowed. She lit the gourd lantern, its flame flickering like a restless spirit, and settled before the loom, the driftwood frame groaning. As she worked, her fingers danced over the threads, weaving scraps of cloth into patterns that captured the sea's wild dance-swirling blues of deep water, fiery reds of sunset, and the silvery glint of fish scales caught in dawn's light. The hours stretched long, the night deepening around her, the shack alive with the rhythmic clack of the loom and the distant murmur of waves. Her creations grew bolder, each tapestry a story of Marisal's soul, stitched with dye she brewed from crushed shells and wild roots gathered along the shore. One humid afternoon, as she knelt by the water's edge, rinsing a length of indigo cloth, a shadow fell across her work. A merchant, his tunic adorned with cowrie shells and his beard streaked with gray, paused to admire the fabric drying on a rock. His eyes widened at the intricate patterns, his fingers tracing the threads as if reading a sacred text. He offered her a stall in Marisal's bustling market, a maze of stalls nestled between the docks and the city's heart, where traders hawked spices, smoked fish, and carved masks under canopies of woven palm. Lila hesitated, her pulse quickening, but the merchant's promise of coins swayed her, a chance to mend her parents' fortunes without abandoning her dream. The next morning, she carried her tapestries to the market, her bare feet sinking into the warm sand as she navigated the crowded lanes. The air thrummed with life women pounding yams in wooden mortar, children darting through the throng with baskets of mangoes, and drummers beating rhythms that pulsed like the tide. She set up her stall beneath a tattered awning, her creations unfurled across a rickety table, their colors catching the sun like a fisherman's net snaring light. Sailors fresh from the sea paused, their weathered faces softening as they ran, calloused hands over the cloth, marveling at the scenes of leaping dolphins and stormy skies. Townsfolk gathered, their murmurs of awe rising above the market's din, and soon coins clinked into Lila's palm bronze discs etched with shells, bartered for her work. She returned to the shack each evening, her basket heavier with earnings, and Kofi's shoulders straightened, his boat repaired with her contributions. Emma's smiles returned, tentative at first, then warm as the hearth, her hands brushing Lila's cheek in quiet gratitude. The market buzzed with her name, whispered from stall to stall, a reputation threading through Marisal like a river finding its course. For weeks, fulfillment wrapped her like a finely woven shawl, her dual life a delicate balance days on the boat, nights at the loom, her hands bridging two worlds. Her stall became a beacon, its colors drawing eyes amid the market's chaos, and Lila's spirits soared with each sail, her dreams no longer confined to the shack's dim corners. She wove tirelessly, her fingers stained with dye, her back aching from long hours, yet her heart glowed with purpose. The coin she earned bought oil for the lantern, fresh palm fronds to patch the roof, and even a rare slab of smoked fish for the family's pot, its savory scent filling the shack with fleeting abundance. Kofi began to hum again, his deep voice weaving through the evening prayers, while Amma's laughter echoed once more, a sound Lila had nearly forgotten. The sea, too, seemed to relent, offering fuller nets as if appeased by her sacrifice. For a time, harmony reigned, the shack a fragile haven where love and labor intertwined. Lila's tapestries adorned fishermen's homes, their walls brightened by her craft, and her name carried on the wind, a quiet song of promise. She moved through her days with a steady rhythm, her hands deft on the boat and nimble at the loom, her life a tapestry of duty and dreams stitched together with care. The market's pulse became her own, its energy fueling her nights, and she dared to imagine a future where her craft might lift her family beyond the shack's humble bounds, her ambition a thread gleaming faintly in the weave of Marisal's vast sunlit sprawl. Chapter 3. The Whispered Offer. The artisan's triumph gnawed at Lila like a persistent wind wearing down the cliffs of Marisal, each empty day at the market unraveling another thread from her spirit. Her stall, once a vibrant hub in the sprawling maze of traders, grew eerily quiet, the air around it thick with stillness as her tapestries hung limp, their colors muted beneath a fine shroud of dust stirred by the sea breeze. The market pulsed on without her, its lanes alive with the clatter of wooden pestles grinding spices, the rhythmic slap of fish against cutting boards, and the laughter of children weaving through the crowd. Yet her corner felt abandoned, a forgotten patch in the city's vibrant weave. Disappointment coiled around her heart, a heavy rope tightening with each unsold piece, while doubt crept in like damprod, seeping into her confidence. She questioned her talent, her once steady hands trembling as they hovered over the loom, the driftwood frame creaking under her hesitant touch. Nights in the shack grew restless, the gourd lantern's flickering light casting jagged shadows across her work, her eyes tracing every stitch for flaws she couldn't name. The artisan Zuri loomed large in her mind, a towering figure from Marisal's cliffside elite, whose silks dazzled the market with hues of saffron and sapphire, their intricate patterns shimmering like the sea under a noon sun. Each sail Zuri made, each gasp of awe from the crowd, struck Lila like a thorn, piercing deeper as her own wares faded into obscurity. One evening, as the sun dipped into the sea, painting the horizon with a fiery glow that bled into the waves, Lila sat slumped by the loom, her fingers idle, her spirit drowning in despair. The shack's walls creaked with the wind, the scent of salt and drying fish heavy in the air, and the distant crash of breakers, a mournful chant. Amma entered silently, her bare feet soft against the worn floor, her hands rough from years of net hauling reaching out to brush Lila's arm. The gentle touch stirred her from the depths, a fleeting warmth that pierced the fog of her thoughts, her mother's presence urging her to trust in the gift she'd nurtured since childhood, a craft born of the sea's own rhythms. The comfort lingered, a fragile thread of hope, but it frayed quickly under a sharper sting that came later that night. As Lila knelt by the shore, rinsing a faded tapestry in the tide's edge, a woman who had once traded eagerly for her work approached, her basket of yams swinging at her hip. She paused, her eyes narrowing as she glanced at the cloth, her nose wrinkling in disdain. The unspoken scorn her dismissal of Lila's efforts as dull and lifeless beside Zuri's radiant splendor cut deeper than any blade, a wound that festered as the woman turned away, her footsteps fading into the sand. The rejection echoed. In Lila's bones, her pride crumbling like dry earth underfoot, her dreams sinking beneath the weight of comparison. Defeated, Lila fled the shack as midnight cloaked Marisal in darkness, her frustration boiling within, a restless fire that drove her to the cliff's jagged edge. The moon hung low, its silver light spilling over the sea, turning the waves into a shimmering expanse that roared below, their fury mirroring her crumbling hopes. She paced the rocky outcrop, her tunic fluttering in the wind, its hem frayed and damp with spray, her bare feet gripping the cool, uneven stone. The cliffs towered around her, their red faces etched with ancient carvings, spirals and fish that seemed to writhe in the moonlight, remnants of tales whispered by elders of spirits who guarded the shore. The air grew thick, heavy with salt, and the faint musk of seaweed, the night alive with the hum of crickets and the distant call of a night bird. As the hour deepened, a figure emerged from the mist that curled off the sea, an elderly woman, her skin wrinkled like dried palm fronds, her eyes gleaming like polished shells caught in the moon's glow. She moved with an unnatural grace, her tattered robe of woven grasses rustling like whispers, her presence both eerie and magnetic, as if she'd stepped from the cliff's own shadows. She drew near, her gaze locking onto Lila's, and offered a cryptic promise, a hidden craft, a loom of ancient power buried deep in the dunes beyond Marisal's reach, its threads capable of weaving mastery over any rival. The words carried a chill, a warning of its shadowy origins woven into the offer, hinting at forces older than the city itself, forces tied to the spirits of earth and sea. The temptation sank into Lila's mind like an anchor dropping through dark waters, its weight anchoring itself in her despair, stirring a hunger she barely recognized. Though the offer prickled her skin with unease, Lila pushed it back, her spirit clinging to a shred of resolve. She turned instead to a flicker of determination, vowing to confront Zuri and uncover the secrets behind her brilliance, seeking a path that felt less tainted. The next dawn broke over Marisal, the sky streaked with pink and amber, the sea calming to a gentle ripple as the city stirred awake. Lila rose with the light, her hands steadying as she donned her finest tunic, indigo-dyed and patched, its edges worn but proud, a testament to her own labor. She braided her hair tightly, the strands gleaming with oil from crushed nuts, and set out for the city's heights, where Zuri's home perched among the cliffside elite, its mud brick walls adorned with shells and beads. The climb took her through Marisal's winding paths, past women weaving baskets under acacia trees, their fingers deft as they twisted grasses, and men carving masks from driftwood, their tools glinting in the rising sun. The air buzzed with the clatter of market life spilling over from below, the scent of roasting yam mingling with the brine of the shore. She reached Zuri's threshold as the morning heat swelled, her shadow falling across the polished stone. Step. The artisan's door stood firm, its surface inlaid with coral, a barrier to her intent. Lila squared her shoulders, her breath catching as she raised her hand, but Zuri emerged briefly, a silhouette regal in a robe of shimmering silk, her eyes flicking over Lila with indifference. A dismissive wave of her hand, a turn of her head, and the door shut with a thud, locking Lila out. The rejection struck like a gust off the cliffs, sharp and cold, bruising her pride and sharpening her desperation. She descended slowly, her steps heavy, the city's hum fading behind her mind grasping at the whispered offer that now pulsed like a drumbeat in the weave of her unraveling soul. Chapter 4. The doom secret humiliated and hollow, Lila retreated to her shack, the artisan's rejection a fresh wound that throbbed with every step down the cliffside path. The sun blazed overhead, its heat a relentless hammer against her. Back, turning the sand beneath her feet into a searing expanse that mirrored the emptiness within. The shack loomed ahead, its palm-frond walls sagging under the weight of the day, the air inside thick with the musk of damp wood and the faint tang of fish scales clinging to the floor. She sank onto the woven mat beside her loom, her body curling inward, her hands limp against the driftwood frame as if it were an anchor in her storm of despair. The market's rejection, Zuri's dismissive wave, and the locked door replayed in her mind, each memory a thread pulled from the fragile tapestry of her pride. The elderly woman's words resurfaced, rising unbidden like a siren's call through the chaos of her need, their promise of a hidden loom weaving through her thoughts with a seductive pull. The shack grew still, the distant crash of waves a muted roar, and in that silence, her resolve shifted, a mix of dread and determination igniting within her, a ember fanned by desperation. She rose, her shadow stretching long across the floor, and stepped outside into the twilight, her bare feet sinking into the cooling sand as she summoned the mysterious figure once more, her heart pounding like a drum against her ribs. The air shimmered before her, a swirl of sand and shadow spiraling upward from the earth, and the elderly woman appeared, her presence as sudden and startling as a storm breaking over the sea. Her skin gleamed dark as polished ebony, her eyes like twin shells catching the last light, her tattered robe of woven grasses rustling with a sound like whispers from the dunes. She stood motionless, her gaze piercing Lila's soul, and revealed a treacherous quest, a journey to claim the ancient loom from a dune-swept realm beyond Marisal's shores, a place where the spirits of the earth held sway. The woman's hand extended, her fingers bony and trembling, and the air before her parted like a curtain, unveiling a shimmering veil that pulsed with a faint, otherworldly glow. Lila hesitated, her breath catching as the wind carried the scent of dry earth and something older, something primal. With a final glance at the shack, its silhouette fading into the dusk, she stepped through the veil, her tunic fluttering as the world dissolved around her. She emerged in a windswept wasteland, a vast expanse where dunes towered like frozen waves, their crests sharp against the sky streaked with ochre and gray. The air howled, gritty with sand that stung her skin, and the ground shifted beneath her, each step a battle against the restless earth. The path stretched ahead, marked by an unseen force, demanding 3 trials to claim the loom's power, its presence a hum in her bones. The first trial rose before her, a silver shuttle, its surface etched with spirals, glinted atop a dune, guarded by a howling sandstorm that roared like a living beast. The wind lashed at her, tearing at her braid and filling her mouth with grit, its fury a wall she could barely pierce. Her eyes watered, her lungs burned, but she pressed forward, her courage a shield that stilled the gusts as she reached out, her fingers closing around the shuttle's cool metal. It thrummed in, her grasp a pulse of energy that steadied her trembling hands. And the storm subsided, leaving only silence and the echo of her triumph. The path shifted, leading her to a hollow in the dunes where the second trial waited, a crimson thread, vivid as blood, coiled within a scorpion's lair, its rocky entrance shadowed and jagged. The creatures skittered across the sand, there, tails arched, their stingers glinting like obsidian in the dim light. Lila's pulse raced, her skin prickling with fear, but she steadied her hand, her movements slow and deliberate as she slipped the thread free, the scorpions scattering into the crevices as if driven by an unseen will. The thread vibrated against her palm, a whisper of power threading through her veins, its warmth a stark contrast to the wasteland's chill. The final trial loomed ahead, a jade needle, its tip sharp and gleaming, perched atop a crumbling cliff that jutted from the dunes, like a broken spine. The ascent stretched her body to its limits, her fingers clawing at loose stone, her feet slipping on shifting sand, the wind tugging at her as if to cast her down. Sweat stung her eyes, her muscles screamed, but she climbed, driven by a fire she couldn't name, until she seized the needle, its energy surging through her like a river breaking free. The wasteland blurred as Lila clutched her prizes, the silver shuttle, the crimson thread, the jade needle, each thrumming with a life of its own, a whisper of dominance that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. The veil shimmered again, and she stepped back into Marisal, the dune shadow fading as the sea's roar greeted her once more. The elderly woman stood waiting, her form half lost in the twilight mist, her eyes narrowing as she offered a final caution. Such power carried a price, a cost woven into its very threads, its weight unspoken but heavy in the air. Lila barely registered the warning, her senses alive with the surge of possibility that coursed through her. She stood on the shore, the waves lapping at her feet, the treasures cradled in her hands like relics of a forgotten age. The shuttle's cool surface pressed against her palm, the thread's warmth coiled around her fingers, the needle's sharpness a promise against her skin. The sea stretched endless before her, its surface catching the moon's first light. And for a moment, she felt invincible, her spirit soaring above the shack, the market, and Zuri's silks. Yet beneath the thrill, the doomed shadow lingered in her bones, a faint ache that whispered of trials yet to come, a thread of darkness stitched into the power she now held. She turned back to the shack, her steps firm, her resolve hardened. The night closing around her like a cloak, as the spirits of Marisal watched in silence from the cliffs above. Chapter 5. The price of master armed with the loom's gifts. Lila wove anew under the shack's dim roof, her fingers threading the silver shuttle, crimson thread, and jade needle into her craft with a fervor that bordered on reverence. The rickety loom groaned under her touch, its driftwood frame trembling as if alive, and the tapestries that emerged shimmered with an unearthly brilliance, their colors leaping like flames against the night. The blues deepened to the hue of midnight waves, the reds blazed like the sun's last gasp, and the silvers glinted like fish scales caught in moonlight, each stitch infused with a power that pulsed beneath her hands. The next morning, she carried her work to Marisal's market, her bare feet sinking into the warm sand as she navigated the bustling lanes, her basket heavy with creations that seemed to hum with their own life. She unfurled them across her stall, the awning casting dappled shadows over the cloth, and the crowd gathered swiftly, drawn by a whisper of something extraordinary. A sailor, his cloak torn by a storm's wrath, stepped forward, his weathered hands offering it to her with a hesitant hope. Before their eyes, Lila wove the silver shuttle through the fabric, the crimson thread binding the edges, the jade needle sealing the mend, and the cloak shimmered, its rents vanishing, its surface rippling like the sea under a gentle breeze. The crowd gasped, their murmurs rising into a swell of awe, their faces alight with wonder as they pressed closer, coins clinking into her palms like rain on the shore. Word of her magic spread through Marisal like a tide sweeping the cliffs, carried on the voices of sailors, traders, and children who darted through the market with tales of the weaver whose hands could mend more than cloth. Her stall overflowed, the throng spilling into the lanes, their bodies a wall of heat and breath as they vied for her work tapestries to hang in mud-brick homes, cloaks to shield against the wind, mats to soften the earth beneath their feet. The coins piled high, bronze discs etched with shells and fish, their weight a testament to her triumph, and Zuri's grand stall stood empty, its silks paling beside Lila's enchanted threads, its once eager buyers drifting away like leaves. On the wind, triumph swelled within her, a fierce tide that lifted her spirit above the shack's humble bounds, her name a song on every tongue, chanted by drummers and whispered by elders around flickering fires. She moved through the market with a new grace, her tunic swaying, her braid gleaming with oil, her eyes bright with the fire of victory. Yet beneath the glow, a cost loomed, its shadow creeping closer with each passing day, a weight she felt, in the ache of her bones and the tremor of her hands when the market fell silent. The elderly woman returned one twilight, her form materializing in a swirl of dust outside the shack, her eyes glinting like shells in the fading light, her presence a chill against the warm sea air. She stood motionless, her robe rustling like dry grasses, and demanded a sacrifice her mother's life to seal the loom's power, to bind its magic irrevocably to Lila's hands. Horror gripped Lila, a cold fist closing around her heart, her love for Amma a fortress against the monstrous demand. She stumbled back into the shack, her breath shallow, her mind reeling as the woman's words echoed like a curse carved into the cliffs. Amma's gentle touch, her songs of the sea, her hands rough with care, these were the threads that had woven Lila's life, and the thought of snuffing them out chilled her to her core. Yet the threat of losing her craft's edge loomed darker, a shadow that gnawed at her resolve, whispering of empty stalls and forgotten dreams. Days passed in haze, the market's clamor a distant hum as guilt and ambition warred within her, their battle a storm that tore at her soul. She wove tirelessly, her fingers bleeding from the shuttle's sharp edge, her tapestries dazzling but her spirit fracturing. One humid night, as the moon hung heavy and full, casting silver across the shack, she acted, her hands trembling as she slipped a curse of thread crimson and pulsing with malice into the shawl Amma wore against the evening chill. The act was swift, her movements mechanical, her eyes averted as she turned away, the loom's hum drowning out the thud of her heart. Morning broke with a silence that pierced the air, Kofi's anguished cries filling the shack as he found Amma. Lifeless on her mat, her shawl tangled around her, her face still and pale as the dawn. Lila stood frozen by the loom, tears streaming down her cheeks, masking the shame that burned within. The loom's power now a bare crown atop her head, its weight crushing her triumph into ash. She returned to the market that day, her steps leaden, her basket heavier with grief than cloth. The crowd greeted her with the same awe, their hands reaching for her tapestries, their coins piling higher, and she wove anew, her creations dazzling, with a brilliance that outshone the sun itself. A fisherman's net mended in moments, its knots gleaming like stars. A widow's mat softened with threads that glowed like embers. The market marveled, her fame soaring to the cliffside heights, a name etched into Marisal's lore. Yet each thread she wove stitched grief deeper into her soul, the silver shuttle cold against her skin, the crimson thread a stain she couldn't wash away, the jade needle a splinter in her flesh. The shack grew hollow without Amma's songs. Kofi's silence a wall between them, his eyes dark with a sorrow she couldn't face. The market's praise rang empty, its rhythm a mockery of the harmony she'd lost. And at night, the loom loomed larger, its frame a shadow that swallowed the lantern's light. She worked on, her hands steady but her spirit unraveling, the power she'd claimed a double-edged blade glory in one hand, torment in the other, its price a wound that bled beneath the surface, a secret woven into every shimmering thread she laid before the world. Chapter 6. The unraveling tide of Marisal crowned Lila its weaving queen, her stall a shrine of wonder nestled in the market's heart, its awning a canopy of reverence beneath the relentless sun. Buyers thronged around her, their bodies a sea of heat and anticipation, their hands outstretched for her tapestries that healed and enchanted with a magic that defied the ordinary. A fisherman's torn sail shimmered anew under her touch, its rents closing like a wound under the silver shuttle's glide. A child's mat softened with crimson threads that glowed like embers, easing restless dreams. A widow's cloak danced with jade-stitched patterns that turned the wind aside. The crowd pressed closer each day, their coins piling high bronze discs etched with shells and fish, their clatter a hymn to her reign, and their voices wove her name into Marisal's lore, a melody carried by drummers along the docks and whispered by elders under starlit skies. Zuri, the once mighty artisan, faded into a forgotten echo, her grand stall abandoned, its silk scattering dust as buyers turned their backs, drawn to Lila's unearthly brilliance. Triumph pulsed through her veins, a tide that lifted her above the shack's humble bounds, her tunic swaying with regal grace, her braid gleaming with oil, her eyes alight with the fire of dominion. Yet shadows deepened beneath the glow, creeping into the corners of her life like dusk swallowing the cliffs, their presence a weight she couldn't shake. Kofi grew distant, his broad shoulders hunching as he moved through the shack, his once warm gaze clouded with a sorrow that pierced Lila's chest. Whispers of Amma's strange death threaded through the docks, carried on the breath of sailors and fishwives who lingered near the water's edge, their eyes darting toward the shack with suspicion. The market buzzed with their tales, how Amma had faded overnight, her shawl tangled around her lifeless form, her passing too swift, too silent for the sea's natural whims. Kofi's hands trembled as he mended nets alone, his silence a wall. Between them, and though suspicion flickered in his dark eyes, Lila's denials held him at bay, her words a fragile shield against the truth he couldn't name. The loom's magic faltered one blistering afternoon, its power stuttering as she wove beneath the market's clamor. A sailor thrust his cloak toward her, its hem frayed by a storm's rage, and she worked the shuttle with practiced grace, but the fabric refused to mend, its tears gaping wide, its threads dull and lifeless. The crowd's gasps turned to murmurs, their awe curdling into doubt, their footsteps retreating as whispers of failure rippled through the air. Panic seized her, a cold wave crashing over her spirit, her hands shaking as she clutched the looms. Treasures, their hum faint against her skin. She fled to the cliffs that night, the moon a pale witness overhead, and summoned the elderly woman. her form rising from the mist in a swirl of sand and shadow, her eyes glinting like shells in the dark. The woman stood motionless, her robe rustling like dry grasses, and demanded her father's life next, her voice a low wind that chilled the air, insisting the loom's power required another thread of blood to blaze anew. Horror surged within. Lila, her love for Kofi, a fortress against the demand, his rough hands and steady presence a lifeline she couldn't sever. She refused, her resolve hardening, and sought another way, retreating to the shack under the cover of dusk. She wove a poisoned net, her fingers threading malice into its knots with the crimson thread, its pulse of venom she could feel, her intent to offer it as tribute to appease the loom's hunger without spilling Kofi's blood. She laid it by his side as he slept, its edges glinting in the lantern's glow. But his prayers murmured in the night, a chant to the sea spirits unraveled its curse, the net crumbling to ash by dawn, its power undone. The elderly woman returned, her shadow lengthening across the shack's floor, and a final price emerged Lila's hands, the source of her craft, the vessels of her gift. In a wrenching ritual under a starless sky, she surrendered them, her scream swallowed by the wind as the woman's bony fingers severed her flesh, the loom blazing once more with a light that seared her eyes. Stumps remained where her hands had been, raw and aching beneath hastily woven gloves, and the loom's magic roared back, its thread shimmering with a brilliance that vanished out from the market's gaze. Years passed, her fame unassailable, her stall a pilgrimage site where Marisal's people knelt in awe, their offerings piling higher, her tapestries weaving a legacy into the city's red cliffs. She moved through the days with a hollow grace, her gloves a secret shroud, her spirit tethered to the loom's relentless hum. A fisherman's love stirred her heart one season, his broad hands gentle as he mended nets beside her, his eyes warm with a tenderness that pierced her isolation. He built a life with her, his presence a balm against the shack's silence, his touch seeking hers in the quiet hours. Yet her secret stumps hidden beneath gloves kept her distant, her arms stiffening at his reach, her excuses a wall she couldn't breach. One night, as he slept beside her, his breath steady against the mat, the loom hummed unbidden, its frame rattling in the corner, its threads weaving a vision that rose before her eyes. Emma's face, etched in crimson and silver, her gaze accusing, her silence a judgment that cut deeper than any blade. Lila woke trembling, sweat beading on her brow, the vision searing into her soul. She stumbled to the cliffs, the loom clutched in her ruined grasp, and cast it into the sea, its glow sinking beneath the waves, swallowed by the tide's dark embrace. Her craft died with it, the shuttle, thread, and needle lost to the depths, her stall abandoned by dawn. The market mourned her absence, but peace settled in its place, a fragile thread of redemption as she turned to the fisherman, his love a quiet stitch to mend her broken life, the sea's song a lullaby over the cliffs. Of Marisal.